Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the March 19th, 2025 iteration of the Hyperlight Community Meeting. Let's get started here. Um, yep, here is the recording. I dropped well, let me start the meeting. I dropped a link to the notes in the chat. They're also at the top of the notes and in the Slack document. Just a quick reminder, if everybody could add their names to the attendees list, we'd like to keep track of that. Okay, let's get started with some announcements. I don't see any announcements, but I think some of the discussion items about KubeCon and other things are going to come up there. All right, do we want to discuss who is uh, potentially going to help take a look at wrangling some issues next week?
Yeah, good idea doing that first. I feel like we always forget.
Yeah, I guess no volunteers yet. We can ask some other people to do that later, or we can start assigning people. Um, yeah. Okay, I guess we'll come back to that. We can start getting into the discussion items. I think Dan, did you add a bunch of these? I think first one is kind of could be considered more of an announcement, but I'll let you kind of
Ah, yeah,
keep
that's
going.
fair. To be honest, I didn't really use the announcement section. I'll move it there for posterity.
Okay,
Uh,
yep, I think uh well it's
that
going, but
should work.
everybody's been busy kind of preparing for KubeCon when that comes back in just a second. I will
Yeah, yeah. I think. Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't see the
Yeah, sorry. I think I just deleted it instead of moving it. Let me try that again. All right, there we are.
okay.
Okay, well, important bit is just to say that KubeCon is coming soon, and with that, we also have Cloud Native Rejects. Hyperlight will have some presence in both of those conferences. We have one Cloud Native Rejects talk that is with myself and one of our coworkers. I don't think Mikhail is here, but with Mikhail, we'll be talking about Hyperlight and one use case of it with Envoy network filters. We also have two booth demos. Just those are just us being at the Azure booth, presenting on Hyperlight, showing some demos, answering questions, and we also have a theater demo. Um, Content is a little bit to be determined, but we'll be certainly showing some exciting work with Hyperlight that is ongoing.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think anybody who if you don't catch the demos, just ask for Hyperlight folks at the Azure booth, and I think people will be happy to direct you to us. Yep. All right. Again, next week's issue wranglers. I think I was doing it last week. I could help out again this week if nobody else volunteers, or I think we can all just kind of treat it as best effort. Um, I guess one other kind of thing next or in 2 weeks, April 2nd, that will be in the middle of KubeCon, right? Do we want to cancel this meeting? Okay, well,
Oh,
I'll add a note for
yeah, fair
the
point.
to the agenda to cancel that meeting. I think folks are going to be quite busy and traveling in different time zones and stuff. So
Yeah, or if anything, we can set some time, maybe to meet in person at KubeCon if folks are
yeah, that would
interested.
be great. I think there's usually a lot of like meet and greet opportunities at KubeCon. I'm not sure how it works for CNCF sandbox projects, but I think we'll definitely keep the Slack channel up to date about when and where folks will be to meet with people.
Sounds good.
Yep. All right. I think now we can get in some of the discussion items. Daniel, did you want to take some of these?
Yeah, sure. Um, so I added first item I added is that Hyperlight V03 is coming out next week. So if we, well, the idea is that we're having train releases, right? The last release that we had was at last week of last month. We're approaching the last week of this month, so we'll have Hyperlight V03 coming out. Yeah, so expect that to be coming soon. Also coming soon, we have Hyperlight Wasm soon planning to be released. More information on that will come soon. We have a blog post, which I think will cover a lot of items there.
Do you want to give a
Um,
quick teaser of what Hyperlight Wasm is for folks who might not know?
yeah, sure, I can cover that. Unless someone else wants to go at it. I think I was looking for Lucy in the call. Yeah, Lucy is the main person that's working on Hyperlight Wasm right now. Hyperlight Core, we're enable people to load in native binaries onto Hyperlight to execute within a hypervisor partition. So those are like PE files or ELF. With Hyperlight Wasm, instead what you can do is you can load WebAssembly modules and potentially WebAssembly components on its release too. Um, yeah, think that mostly covers it. The API is a little bit different. So with with Hyperlight, what you're probably used to doing right now is you create an initialized sandbox. With that, you load a guest binary, and then maybe you register host functions and run it. With Hyperlight Wasm, you have an added step where we have a proto sandbox, and what that means is that we're loading in the actual runtime of WebAssembly. So that would be something like, if you're familiar with the Wasm ecosystem, that would be something like Wasm time or something like that. With Hyperlight, we're using Wasm time.
Yeah, awesome. I think, yeah, that's a good teaser. I think blog posts and documentation in the repositories, I think will be also very helpful for everybody here. So,
Yeah.
yep. All right. Next is Hyperlight Core will soon support a flexible memory layout. I believe that's also you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If you want, Mark, I can maybe share my screen and go a little bit into that more
Sure.
detail.
Let me stop sharing, and I think you should be able to pick it up.
All right, let me try. I'm absolutely terrible at Zoom, but hopefully this works. Okay, you should be hopefully seeing a PR. Is that what you
Yep.
see?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So for some context, here is what we currently have in main of Hyperlight. You see, I'm on this file, mem layout. Previously in Hyperlight, we would have this very static layout of memory. Right? We would have the guest code. This is the actual code that we load in, the entry point, things like the guest this function dispatch pointer, all that is present in the guest code. Then we'll have the PB, which is the structure that we use to communicate some things between the host and the guest. Right, and the PB is where the guest would set the function dispatch pointer and those items. Would also have host function details, guest error log for errors, input and output data are the structures that we have for the guest and the host to communicate between one another. So things like host function calls, guest function calls. You can probably guest panic context would be for panics. So if you have any panics, the panic handler that we have defined in the Hyperlight guest library would use the guest panic context to set context of panics. And then the usual things that you would expect, like a heap, pages, stack, and so forth. Now, we're interested. Before the guest code, I also have the paging sections, which is what allows us, the guest, to access these regions of memory. But now we want to be able to load in sort of more dynamic guests onto Hyperlight, and those guests may not fulfill this very specific set or this very specific memory layout that we have right now. So the point of this PR that I've been working on for a while is to allow a more dynamic memory layout. What that means is that essentially statically in the host, we'll have just a few memory sections. That would be the guest code. That is kind of a given. You know, you want to run something within a hypervisor partition, so the guest code has to be there. And the paging so that the guest can actually, access those sections. But the big difference now is this undifferentiated block of memory. In this undifferentiated block of memory, the guest can now address sections in any way it would like. So you see, this is just an example, but I have the PB, host function definitions, input and output data. Those are sections that the guest could set. So an example, I provide the guest with maybe 2 MB of data. The guest will go in there and will say, hey, from address 0 to maybe 1 page, so 4 KB, I have the PB. after those 4 kilobytes, I'll have host function details and so forth. So that's the dynamic aspect that we want to be able to allow, so that more dynamic guests or maybe more complex guests can be loaded and not have to sort of retrofit to fit this static layout that we have. Yeah, so this memory work is ongoing. You can possibly follow the commits that I have. I cleaned that up just yesterday for how that work is going, but I'll probably be showing updates on what that is looking soon.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions or comments around that?
One question from me. So the guest would still have to have some code that actually sets up uh, this layout, even if it is dynamic, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's right. And that's a really good question. So for that, I'm leveraging, if you check Hyperlight, we have a couple of folders where we have the Hyperlight guest library, we have the Hyperlight host, and we have Hyperlight common. I'm using Hyperlight common as the library to set things that maybe external guests or whatever can use to do that memory setup. So if you check the PR, you'll see that now in Hyperlight common, see if I can find it. Yeah, Hyperlight common, I have the Hyperlight PEB in the input and output data sections. And this will provide the API that the guest can use to set those memory regions and address those in any way you would like. You'll
Mhm.
see things like set guest heap data region, set host area data region, and so you can leverage these functions to set up your guest.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Um, will the guest now set up the paging structure too?
So the guest is not setting up the paging structure. The paging structure is still set up on the host, and that's possible just because the paging that I have on the host is you set up that big undifferentiated region of memory. All the guest does is it addresses that region any way it like. And addressing here is really just saying, hey, I'll use this section for input and output data. I'll use this section for errors and so forth.
I see.
Yeah, but we still need the host to set up the C3 registers and stuff like that for the guest to actually access those pages.
So will all of that undifferentiated memory have the same kind of flags
Permissions?
and stuff? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it will. And right now we have just max permissions with read, write, and execute. And I discussed a little bit of this with Lucy, and we think that is okay. Mostly because we're assuming that whatever is going on in that undifferentiated region is completely corruptible by the guest. So
I see.
optimally, the host will not make any assumptions about what is going on there.
Thanks.
So this will replace the existing memory layout, or it will live in tandem, like once this PR gets launched?
Yeah, that's right. So the
Okay.
file that I was showing here, the layout.rs, if you check the PR, it is actually completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
So that file is gone. We just have now one section. Well, we have the guest code, the paging, and the undifferentiated memory region set up. And those are now set up. I cleaned that code up a bit. We had a HIP posted. Let me see if I can find it. We have a HIP posted a while back by Ludwig about having a sandbox builder.
Mm-hmm.
And I used those ideas starting up that work in here. And so that custom memory region, instead of being set up in that layout file, is now set up in this sandbox builder. And it has an API for setting the next section of memory and doing all that work.
No, nice. Thanks.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. I was going to ask if there was documentation or examples of how the new sandbox setup creation looks like.
Yeah, I have a test, which I think is probably the best
Pretty.
display of what it looks like. Uh, did it open? I thought I opened a new file. Oh, there we go. Yeah, let me just scroll to the bottom. So, yeah, this test sandbox builder. Remember
Mhm.
before I was mentioning how you'd set up an initialize sandbox, you would register host functions and initialize it. Now the uninitialized sandbox is essentially not a pub API anymore. It's now a pub crate. So you create a sandbox builder. you provide it with the guest binary that you want to use. You have options that you can set. You can set guest debug info. You can set max initialization time, execution time, those configuration variables. So before we also had that sandbox configuration item that is now cleaned up, and it's changeable via the sandbox builder. And then you just build the sandbox. So you call this build method, which gives you the initialized sandbox. You'll note that I can then register host functions here, hoping to clean this up so that these functions can also be registered onto the sandbox builder rather than using the trait work that we have right now. But that's probably upcoming work and outside of the scope of the PR.
Okay, yeah. Probably be good to highlight that in the PR and have folks
Yeah.
take a look too. But yeah, this looks interesting.
Thanks. Any more questions? All right. If not, I think we can probably go to the next agenda item.
Yep,
Um,
that was MSHV GDB debugging coming soon.
yeah, I added this item here just to sort of highlight. This is Doro's work of GDB, MSHV debugging coming soon. Doro, you added previously KVM and you displayed that in one of the committee meetings. Just wanted to highlight that we have that coming for our MSHV. I've been using a lot of GDB debugging that you provided for the memory layout work. It's been really awesome work, and I'm really excited for that to come in MSHV.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for mentioning this. Yeah, I'm addressing some of the comments in the PR, and yeah, I hope that by the end of the week we could merge this.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so next, I think that was mostly the end of the discussion items that we had, except for the backlog grooming. I think it's up to folks here if we want to end the meeting early or start some backlog grooming for the remaining, 9 minutes of the meeting. I think it's really up to whatever folks want.
Fine with the backlog grooming.
What was that? Sorry, what was that?
I'm fine with the backlog grooming. I mean,
I guess,
Cool.
Dan, do you want to continue sharing the screen or take that?
Yeah, for sure. I can take that over. So just for context, for backlog grooming with Hyperlight was previously a closed source project. We open sourced, and we had a bunch of issues previously in Hyperlight that we took the effort to migrate. And so backlog grooming, what we mean here is just going through the issues that we migrated, cleaning them up, assigning the proper labels, and following, the standards that we've set for this, so that it's organized for people to say, go in and maybe, oh, this is a good first issue, pick up and work on them. So we've been going through that effort of cleaning up the work. So I think last time we paused on issue 188. And this is pretty manual work. Really, what we do is we just go in and we evaluate the issue. We decide where we want to add it. There's a couple of options. We have just a backlog. We have parked. Parked means that maybe someone can keep me honest here, but I think the idea is that we're not working on this anytime soon, or it's not even planned, or part of the backlog. Because the backlog I understand as items that we could pick, maybe not in the next release, but things that will be coming soon. But parked, there is no one that is working on that anytime soon.
Yeah, I think the park, the stuff that we've agreed would be either like beneficial to the project or should be addressed, but we don't think at least any of the core people right now have time to work on it anytime soon, so we can reevaluate after some of the other milestone work or backlog work gets cleared.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and then after that we have upcoming. These are things that are not being worked on 03, but will be worked on potentially 04. We have a couple of labels. I think, Ludwig, you just merged APR recently, highlighting what is the expectation around labels. I think that is in, GitHub labels. So if folks want to see, how we're using the labels and understand a little bit more of that work, you can follow this doc. really great world Ludwig. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're going through the PRs. We're assigning labels according to the standards that we've set. We're assigning the proper milestone, and we do that one by one. So right here we have revisit tracing strategy. So is this about we have across the code base a bunch of instrumentation um, flags on our functions. Are we talking about that, or are we meaning more, say, infos or debugs and making sure that looks good?
I think this almost looks like should be potentially multiple different issues. Because I see some things that are specific, like including the guest calls and tracing spans that are probably individually actionable. But this looks like
I think
if anybody has any ideas about how to improve tracing, we can throw it here and see what sticks. Simon,
yeah,
did you?
I just dropped a comment in that I think we should first of all remove all the trace attributes from non-public function calls, because it seems pointless to start a trace span at a non-entry point. Unless someone feels strongly about the fact that you maybe use those for monitoring performance or something, which I think is not the intent. But the second thing is, I think we already have another issue for the bullet point 2, including guest calls and tracing spans.
Ah,
I think it says something like extend the scope so that spans extend into the guest, something like that. I can't remember.
yeah, investigate making trans spans flow into the Hyperlight guest.
Yeah, so
You're
that's
right.
the same. That's the same thing, really. There's bullet point 2 in this one.
Okay.
I think the principle, though, here for this particular item should be that we provide as rich tracing as we can, but leave it to the host to decide how they want to make use of that, right? So it's a bit tricky, but
Yeah. I think there could be some value to providing trace pans on not just pub functions, say things that we might want to monitor, maybe say evolving, although evolving the sandbox is a pub function. Maybe loading the guest binary. I don't think that's directly pub, but maybe that's something that we want visibility on. But I
yeah,
agree that we have a bunch of
I think we'll still see those
there,
things, but they'll be embedded within a span, right? Rather than from the
but not out there.
from the perspective of a user of the API, you'd effectively get a trace for the entire API call that you made. And the correlation would be one span per API call. I don't know if it just feels to me like that's the right level of correlation, but I
Sure.
don't know.
Yeah, I think we can evolve it, and we can also have
Yeah.
like children's spans, right? That could measure individual things, but
Yeah,
So I guess criteria of completion to this PR is really just going through, evaluating the trace spans that we have, changing, removing potentially most of them. And then we can leave the second bullet point up to 318.
Yeah.
Is this something that we feel like we'll work on soon? Do we want to keep it in the backlog?
Well,
I almost
it's not going to be in 3, is it?
No.
Yeah, I don't think it's O3. I almost feel like we should maybe have small, like either split this up into different work items and put something like that 318 in an upcoming milestone instead of this one, since this is still kind of open-ended.
Okay. I'll move it up to upcoming right now, and then when we do, we go through and decide the work items for O4. When we visit upcoming, we can reevaluate it.
That works.
Do you want to assign any labels to this outside from confirmed? So again, for context, going through our labels. We don't want to add any of the kind labels because those are specific to PRs. We have the GitHub types. So those would be not labels, but these types right here that's already set as design. The lifecycle, This means we currently have confirmed. That means that the issue is confirmed. We could have things like needs review. Those are items that we potentially, when we're finished with the backlog grooming, we'll go and we'll look through needs info. Potentially, maybe someone submitted an issue and we want more information, or blocked. I guess it's kind of self-explanatory. And those are also conclusions of the issue, say duplicate fix, not a bug, won't fix, that we might want to add in when the issue is done. But for this particular issue, I think lifecycle confirmed makes sense. Do we consider this to be a good first issue?
Possibly the work could be a good first issue, but coming up with like the refining the actual issue into what we want to do, maybe not. I think that's probably going to take somebody who's quite familiar with the like all the different internals of Hyperlight.
Yeah, maybe we go back to the point you had prior of splitting the issue. I think parts of it potentially are good first issues, right? Maybe remove the instrumentation attributes of all of our setters and getters could be a good first step. But maybe talking about design would take a little more. Do we have the help wanted label yet? Maybe that could be a good one, sort of an in-between. Someone wants to work on it?
I kind of feel like we should save the help wanted label until it is a bit more scoped,
Okay.
but that's just me. If other people want to edit, we can add that.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Cool. Off of the areas, we have API, dependencies, documentation, infrastructure, performance, security, and testing. Maybe infrastructure? Do we mean infrastructure as sort of process?
I thought, yeah, infrastructure is more of like the CI and workflows.
Okay. So maybe not assign a area. Those are optional anyways.
Yeah.
So we can leave it at confirmed and upcoming makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, I think we'll revisit after the O3 release, right?
Moving on, we have investigate slow sandbox drop times. Okay, I think labels were good here. Bug, I think maybe makes sense. In terms of milestone, I feel like this could be something that we might want to work on next, but if no one wants to pick that item, yeah.
This
I
one
think we
might,
should
one
make.
might be appropriate. Oh, and sorry, Dora.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was saying that maybe we should take a look at on in the
Cool.
future. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, there we have it. That covers that one. Then we have consider using this area instead of anyhow in Hyperlight Common. I think this issue should potentially change a little bit. We right now have sort of guest errors that look one way, which I think are still defined by our flat buffer schema. And we have host errors, which are pretty extensive, and I think we use this error there. And right now in anyhow, we're using anyhow in Hyperlight Common. I think maybe we could sort of refactor that so that in Hyperlight Common we specify all the errors that we have that could happen either in a guest or in a host, so that we can have one thing that serves the end user. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so there's two things. One, this error didn't support no standard when we started using it, which is sort of how we ended up. I think there is another issue that talks about what you just talked about in terms of basically representing client errors, guest errors correctly.
Could it be improve error handling?
It might be that one.
Hmm.
Oh, I think this is what you mean, right?
Yeah, but the description above is sort of partially related to what you just said. It's not the entire thing, but
Okay. Yeah, I added the notes so that whoever works on this can also keep an eye on that. Um,
so
the
I think
process of
this I think this would be a good first step is use this error in Hyperlight Common, then move the errors into Hyperlight Common, which might not be possible because when I was doing a proof of concept, I ended up having to put Hyperlight errors in its own crate because of circular references. You get into a mess when you put errors into Hyperlight Common because it depends on errors and then other things depend on. Anyway, you end up with circular references. But the step would be make this use this error, factor out the errors into a shared thing, and then make errors type specific in the guest and resurface those errors in the host.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. This became pretty apparent with the memory layout work that I was doing because now moving the input and output data to Hyperlight Common, I was left having to in the guest to map errors from anyhow to say a guest error, and I think that doesn't look really good.
Yeah.
Cool. I think this could
Definitely
potentially
be
be
upcoming.
Yeah,
Mark.
I think we should start doing this as soon as possible because it's going to affect the public API ultimately because instead of returning a guest error, you're going to return a typed error.
Yeah. Do you feel like this is a good first issue? I think there's
No.
parts of it that are, but parts of it that are not. Having it be
Yeah, you're
this
right.
error is easy, but
You're right. I think conversion of anyhow to this error might be, but the rest of it might be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
And
I'll
might need to
remove the.
coordinate with other ongoing work.
Yeah. But if you want to get involved, I think this could be a good issue to sort of pick up and maybe start discussions on Slack and go from there. Cool.
Just doing a time check too. We have less than 4 minutes before our meeting's gonna
Yeah.
get dropped. So I'll do another reminder in 2 minutes.
Sure. Maybe we can cover one more before we
Yep.
close off. That is make builder for uninitialized sandbox and sandbox configuration. That's part of the work that's being addressed in my memory refactor PR. So maybe I'll move this to upcoming for sure. As for areas, I think this is API. Can we assign multiple types, or does it have to be one?
Those GitHub types, I think, can only be one.
Ah,
But I think
okay,
we can add, we can add or like change the types up right there.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'll also add a note, and this is partially related. 287, I think. Yeah. Cool. And then I can then reassess this. I think we might have another item for the sandbox builder, or is it just a hip? Yeah, maybe not. And if folks aren't familiar, by the way, I mentioned HIP before. HIP is our Hyperlight improvement proposal. We have a template for it. So if it's a work item that you maybe, it's a design that you like to work on, you like to propose to the team, following the HIP is how you would do it. Hyperlight. Is it in docs? Does anyone remember?
I see the
Proposals.
proposals folder right there on the left.
Yeah, I thought it was somewhere. Oh yeah.
Yeah, good catch. Yeah, so here you go. So if anyone wants to check that out, that is what I'm talking about when I mentioned hips.
As long as we're here, sorry, Dan. I wanted
Oh,
to
go ahead.
mention something. As long as we're here, I've been looking through the code and I saw a lot of log messages that don't have a common format. Do we want to address this, or should they look in a common way, let's say, in a better way? How do you feel about this?
Agreed. I think we should definitely improve our logs and maybe set a standard.
Okay, I'll open up an issue then.
Cool. Right. I think we're nearing the end of time. We might get cut off. Do we end at 9:40?
We've got 1 minute left, like 90 seconds left. So I think we could probably end it cleanly and pick this up later.
All right. So thanks everyone for attending, and I guess I'll see you all in the next community meeting.
Yep.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye everyone.